Everyone wants bigger buds, dense, heavy, sticky flowers covered in resin.
But if you ask beginners how to get them, most will give the same answer.
Use a bloom booster, add more phosphorus, buy expensive nutrients.
Sounds logical, except that's usually not what makes buds bigger.
In fact, by the time most growers start asking, how do I make my buds bigger? The answer has already been decided weeks earlier. Here's a question. How can two people grow the exact same strain under almost the same light, using almost the same nutrients, and still end up with completely different harvests? One grows thick, heavy colas. The other gets dozens of small, airy buds.
Was it luck? Better genetics? More fertilizer? Not exactly.
Because growing big buds isn't about one magical trick. It's about dozens of small decisions made throughout the plant's entire life.
And today, we're going to break them down, starting with the biggest myth of all.
Let's start with something almost every beginner believes. If your buds aren't getting bigger, just feed the plant more. More bloom nutrients, more phosphorus, more potassium, maybe another bottle that promises big flowers.
After all, if you want something to grow, you feed it more, right? Not necessarily.
Imagine trying to make a person run faster by giving them twice as much food. It doesn't work. Food only helps if the body can actually use it. Plants work the same way. Nutrients don't magically create bigger buds. They simply give the plant materials it may need. If something else is limiting growth, more nutrients won't solve the problem. In fact, they often make things worse.
So if nutrients aren't the secret, what is? The answer starts before the first leaf even appears. It starts with genetics.
Imagine planting two different tomato varieties. One naturally grows tiny cherry tomatoes. The other grows giant beefsteak tomatoes. Now imagine giving both plants perfect care. The same water, the same sunlight, the same fertilizer.
Will the cherry tomato suddenly grow giant fruits? Of course not. Because that's not what its genetics were designed to do.
Cannabis works exactly the same way. Every strain has its own strengths. Some were bred for huge harvests, some for potency, some for flavor, some stay short and compact, others stretch like crazy.
No amount of fertilizer can completely change what a plant was genetically built to become. That's why experienced growers don't just ask, what's the strongest strain? They ask, what's this strain actually good at?
Choosing high-yield genetics doesn't guarantee massive buds, but choosing genetics that naturally produce small flowers puts a ceiling on your harvest before you even plant the seed. And here's where beginners often get frustrated. They buy premium seeds. They do everything right, and they still don't get giant buds. Why?
Because genetics only give the plant potential. Potential still has to be built. And surprisingly, that process starts long before flowering.
Here's something that surprises most beginners. Big buds aren't created during flowering, they're prepared during vegetation. Let's imagine two identical plants. Same genetics, same light, same nutrients. The only difference, plant A spends 3 weeks in vegetation, plant B spends 6. Now ask yourself, which plant has more branches? Which one has more leaves? Which one has a bigger root system? And most importantly, which one has more places where buds can eventually grow? Exactly. Flowering doesn't magically create structure. It simply fills in the structure that already exists. Think of building a house. Nobody starts with the roof. Everything depends on the foundation underneath. Cannabis is no different. During vegetation, your plant is doing far more than growing leaves. It's building roots, strengthening stems, creating new branches, preparing the entire framework that will later hold heavy flowers. That's why healthy vegetation is so important. A strong plant enters flowering ready to produce. A weak plant enters flowering just trying to keep up. And here's another mistake beginners make. They switch to flowering too early because they're excited to see buds. Yes, flowers appear sooner, but there's a trade-off. A smaller plant usually has fewer branches, Fewer branches mean fewer bud sites, and fewer bud sites usually mean a smaller harvest.
So before you start thinking about bloom boosters, ask yourself a different question. Did you give the plant enough time to build itself first?
Because once flowering begins, there's one thing the plant needs more than anything else: energy. And every gram of every bud starts with sunlight.
Let's clear up another common misunderstanding. People often say plants need light to grow. That's true, but it's also incredibly vague. Here's what's actually happening.
Buds don't make food, leaves do. Every leaf acts like a tiny solar panel. It captures light, uses that energy to produce sugars, and those sugars become everything the plant builds. New roots, new stems, new branches, and eventually bigger buds. In other words, every gram of every flower started as sunlight. That's why light is so important. Not because light magically makes buds bigger, but because without enough light, the plant simply doesn't have enough energy to build them. Imagine trying to build a house. You have the workers, you have the tools, you have the blueprint, but every day, someone only delivers half the building materials. What happens? The house still gets built, just much more slowly, and maybe it never gets finished properly. Plants work the same way. If they don't receive enough usable light, they have to make decisions. Should they grow taller, make more leaves, develop roots, or build flowers? There's only so much energy available, and if that energy is limited, something has to give. Usually, it's the buds. But here's another mistake beginners make. They hear this and immediately think, easy, I'll just buy the biggest grow light I can afford. Not so fast. Too little light slows growth, but too much light, or placing the lamp too close, can stress the plant just as much. Leaves curl upward. The plant tries to protect itself. Growth slows down.
More light doesn't always mean more buds. The goal isn't maximum light. It's the right amount of light. And even when your light is perfect, there's still another problem. Not every bud receives the same amount of it.
Take a look at how cannabis grows naturally. One main stem, one tall top, smaller branches underneath. It almost looks like a Christmas tree. Outdoors, that's perfectly normal. The sun moves across the sky all day. Light reaches the plant from different angles. But indoors, your grow light stays in one place, right above the plant. That changes everything. The top of the plant gets almost all the light. The lower branches get whatever is left. And that's why beginners often harvest one nice-looking cola, followed by lots of tiny popcorn buds underneath. The plant isn't doing anything wrong. It's simply following the light.
So how do experienced growers solve this? They don't try to grow taller plants, they try to grow wider plants.
Instead of letting one branch dominate, they gently spread the branches apart. Sometimes they remove the very top. Sometimes they bend branches sideways. Sometimes they guide new growth across a net. Different techniques, same goal, create one flat, even canopy, where every future bud receives roughly the same amount of light. Now imagine 10 branches, all getting equal light, instead of one giant cola and 9 tiny ones. Suddenly, 10 large buds become possible.
That's why experienced growers rarely chase height. They chase light distribution. Because when light is shared more evenly, your harvest usually grows with it.
But then beginners notice something strange. Some growers don't just bend branches, they actually cut healthy leaves off the plant. Why would anyone do that? Imagine spending 2 months growing a healthy plant, watching every new leaf appear, protecting every branch, making sure nothing gets damaged, and then someone tells you, now cut some of it off.
Sounds completely backwards. Why would removing healthy parts of the plant ever increase your harvest?
The answer comes down to priorities. Not every bud has the same future. Look deep inside a large plant. Near the bottom, hidden beneath the canopy, those tiny bud sites receive very little light. They usually become small, airy flowers, often called popcorn buds. Meanwhile, the plant is still spending water, nutrients, and energy keeping those branches alive, energy that could have gone somewhere else. That's why experienced growers sometimes remove weak, lower growth, or a few large leaves blocking the light. Not because leaves are bad, leaves are incredibly important. Remember, they're the plant's solar panels. The goal isn't to remove as many leaves as possible. The goal is to help light reach the parts of the plant that can actually produce quality flowers. At the same time, better airflow reduces excess humidity, making dense buds less likely to develop mold later in flowering. But here's where beginners often go too far. They watch an advanced grower strip half the plant and try to copy exactly what they see. That's a mistake. Heavy pruning is stressful. Done at the wrong time or done too aggressively, it can reduce your harvest instead of improving it.
For most beginners, less is usually more. Remove only what clearly blocks light or what will never become a quality bud anyway. And speaking of things beginners often overdo, nothing gets overused more than nutrients. Let's go back to the myth we started with. Your buds stop getting bigger, so you feed more nutrients. Sounds reasonable, except that's often the moment beginners create a brand new problem.
Here's why. Imagine filling a gas tank that's already full. Adding more fuel won't make the car faster, it just overflows. Plants work in a similar way. They can only absorb what they actually need. Everything else stays behind. And when too many nutrients build up around the roots, the plant struggles to absorb water properly. Ironically, you can end up seeing deficiency symptoms, even though there's plenty of nutrients sitting in the soil. So the grower thinks, my plant looks hungry, and adds even more. Now the problem gets even worse. This is why experienced growers rarely ask, how much can I feed? Instead, they ask, what does my plant actually need today? Healthy roots, proper watering, enough oxygen in the root zone.
Those things usually matter far more than buying another bottle of Bloom Booster. Because nutrients don't force growth, they support it.
But even with perfect genetics, healthy roots, and great lighting, there's one more thing that quietly steals harvests every single day: your environment. Imagine two identical grow rooms, same strain, same light, same nutrients, same grower. Everything looks identical, except for one thing. The first room stays stable, the second gets a little too hot every afternoon, humidity jumps up every night, air barely moves around the plants. Nothing looks dramatic, nothing suddenly dies, but after 3 months, the harvests look completely different. That's because plants don't only react to big mistakes, they react to small stresses, repeated over and over again. A room that's just a little too warm, humidity that's just a little too high, poor airflow around dense flowers. Each problem seems small on its own. Together, they slowly reduce the plant's ability to grow at its full potential.
And here's something beginners often overlook. Plants don't need perfect conditions. They need consistent conditions.
A slightly imperfect environment that stays stable is usually much better than perfect conditions that constantly change. Consistency allows the plant to focus on growing. Constant changes force it to keep adapting instead. And that brings us to the biggest myth of all, the idea that there's one final trick that suddenly makes buds explode in size. Every growth cycle, the same question appears. How do I make my buds swell during the last 2 weeks? People search for miracle products, bloom boosters, secret nutrient recipes, ice water, 48 hours of darkness, anything that promises bigger buds overnight.
But here's the truth. By the last weeks of flowering, your harvest is mostly revealing itself, not creating itself.
Think back to everything we've talked about. The genetics you chose, the time you spent in vegetation, the strength of the roots, the amount of light, the shape of the canopy, the environment around the plant. Every one of those decisions added a little more potential or quietly took some of it away. There isn't one magical moment where huge buds suddenly appear. They're the result of dozens of good decisions made consistently from the very beginning.
That's the difference between beginners and experienced growers. Experienced growers don't look for shortcuts. They build better plants, and better plants naturally grow better buds. So, do bloom boosters work? Sometimes. Can good nutrients improve a harvest? Absolutely. Can quality genetics make a difference? Of course.
But none of those things work in isolation. Big buds aren't created by one product, one trick, or one lucky decision. They're built step by step. From the moment the seed starts growing, every healthy root, every strong branch, every hour of good light, every stable day in the grow room, by the time flowering begins, you're no longer creating your harvest. You're revealing everything the plant has been building for weeks.
And that's the biggest lesson every beginner eventually learns. Stop chasing miracle products. Start growing healthier plants. Because healthy plants grow big buds. If you found this video helpful, share it with someone who's trying to grow bigger, denser flowers. And if you want to become a smarter grower, not just a luckier one, subscribe. Because the biggest buds always start long before flowering.